Hello and welcome. So I'm super excited. Today we are diving straight into the major personality parts that are driving your life. Now today's video is more an overview of parts therapy and personality parts because it will allow you to understand much better the videos that are going to be coming up around specific parts. So today you're going to learn about what is a personality part first and foremost. You're going to be learning also the kind of language that personality parts within us will use. You're going to be learning their intentions. You're going to be meeting very briefly the major parts that we're going to be talking about. And also during this, it's very likely, especially with the language, you're going to start to recognize whether you have a parts conflict, have been in a parts conflict, or you're going to have this knowledge to take forwards into the future to actually then also recognize when you become aware of when obviously you have a parts conflict going on. I do it not all the time, but obviously I can hear it in myself, but I can also hear it in clients. And parts therapy is something I use a lot with clients. It's something I've used a lot actually with myself, which people find really strange. They're like, how can you be a client and a therapist at the same time? But for some reason I am able to do that. I'm able to compartmentalize and do that with myself and ask myself the questions I need to ask to make this the most effective kind of modality or therapy to use on myself. So I've had a lot of insights and experience from using it with myself, with clients, and we've had some amazing results. Okay, so who am I? I am Victoria Smith-Gillard. I am the owner of Ametrine Holistics Limited, and I'm a people and pet therapist, medium and healer. I work in three distinct ways. So I work with living pets with emotional and behavioural issues. So I help people heal through their pets' issues. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't obviously work with the pet's issue. I absolutely do. But I work very much with what the pet is showing that actually is also a mirror or a message for someone, for one of the owners as well. I also work with bereavement. So I work with bereaved pets who are still here, who are still living and grieving. I work with pet owners who are grieving. I also work with pets in spirit. So I communicate via mediumship and animal communication with their soul in spirit to obviously to facilitate healing. I also work with what we call codependency. So I work with females who are in or have been in toxic relationships due to my own background. And I work to help them build up their self-esteem, their boundaries, self-love, self-compassion, the list goes on. So I help them step back into their own power, if you like, regain their self-worth and really build themselves back up. So let's get cracking with this first video. So we are a sum of all of our parts. So I want you to just close your eyes and imagine your body for a moment is a sum of all of the different parts of you. Now, I know you're going to say to me, Victoria, I don't even know what part is. So a personality part can be anything really it's a part of you that has generally its own thoughts, its own beliefs, its own feelings, emotions, behaviors, patterns, coping strategies. It's parts of you, for instance, that have been through something in life. So it could be a part of you that was bullied when you were younger. It could be a part of you that is protective. It could be a part that's confident or assertive, a part that really wants to go out and do, public speaking, or it wants to, run a sanctuary, or it might be a people-pleasing part of you. So it can be anything and everything. So very often it might be that somebody says to me, I feel really angry about this situation. So we will work with the part of them that feels angry. Okay, and then that part will develop from there. So we won't necessarily be able to name the part other than what is presenting at the time. So the symptom, if you like. It might be a part that's running a particular habit, so a part that's smoking, or part of you that wants to give up smoking. To be fair, I don't generally work with kind of habits actually that much, but they still exist, and I have done it in the past. So I'm hoping that's making a bit more sense to you. But if it isn't, when I've put on a post on social media sharing this episode, feel free to ask questions, okay? Because I'd love you to understand this more as we move through these series of videos that actually are sharing parts therapy and the particular parts. So we are a sum of all of these different parts of us, okay? And a personality part is normally something that's in charge. This is one way I like to put it as well, is it's a part that's in charge in any given moment in something that somebody brings to me. So that's why I say it's going to be at the forefront. So it's going to be, as I say, that they're saying they're really angry or they're really sad, or so it might be a particular emotion that they're sharing with me. So ways you can identify parts. Again, I want to share this because once you become aware of this, you can't become unaware, if that makes sense. So it's really good for expanding our awareness. So the most obvious one is somebody will say to me, part of me. Part of me really would love to go out and do public speaking, but oh my goodness, there's a part of me that is just holding me back. Like, I am so scared to do it and I don't know why, or part of me just wants to stay in my cave. So you've got parts there. You've got a part that wants to go out and do XYZ, and you've got a part that's kind of wanting to stay back. That's something that we can work with, and it doesn't just have to be two parts either. So for instance, when I do parts therapy on myself, or I need parts therapy, I will try it myself, but sometimes I will have quite a lot of parts. The most I've had, I think, is 5, which I'll share an example of that later on. And for that, obviously, I couldn't do that on my own. That was too much for me, even me, to hold in my own head. So I did go to my tutor, and obviously we did it that way. So you can have more than just 2 parts in a conflict. And you do have, I'm going to share this now, although I'll share it later on. You do have in parts therapy what we call, in a way, the parts that have the issues. So, the part that's angry, the part that might be feeling useless or whatever it is. And then you have what we call resource parts. So these are parts that we bring out of you that can help with the situation, that might be able to bring a resolution or bring their knowledge and their skills to the table. Okay. So part of me this, part of me that. Okay. And often you will see people do this with their hands as well. Part of me just wants to, and part of me, and I appreciate people that are watching this as an audio won't see this, but often people will use their hands. They will literally do a hand movement that suggests there is a part of them on one hand and a part of them on the other. So I hope that it is a good visual for you to imagine. I really want to, but I am. And then you might have an emotion just following that. So I really want to do X, but. So there's the yes, but, if you like. So again, that can often indicate a parts conflict. A part of somebody that has a phobia. So there's a phobia of dogs. That's a part for us to work with. Now, in that case, there's not necessarily a conflicting part. There might be. So it might be somebody is really phobic of dogs, but would, love to own a dog, or wants to go and see their friend who has a dog when they can't do that right now. But it might just be the partner has the phobia, and we work with that, and then we bring out the resource parts to help that part as well. And what I do with parts therapy is, when I'm working with parts, I will actually integrate any therapy, so not just parts therapy, any therapy that I feel is relevant. So if somebody is in a part of themselves, and I will explain the process in a minute. So if somebody is within a part, okay, they're experiencing a part, which means that they may have visuals come up, they might have auditory, so they might have words coming to their head, or feelings, they might have words that they're saying to themselves, they might have thoughts like beliefs that are holding them back, that are disempowering beliefs. They might it's all of the senses, okay, that somebody might be in for this. And so what I will do is, because somebody is in that part and they're experiencing, the re-experiencing whatever, okay, mainly emotions, then what I will do is I will work to release those emotions with them, because they're in it, they're experiencing it, they're feeling that emotion, they're connecting to that emotion. And we know about the mind-body connection. And if you don't, I can recommend several books. So I know we're slightly digressing, but I know that, you know, we just need to go with the flow. So several books around mind-body connection. You've got Yvette Rose, Metaphysical Anatomy. You've got The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, I believe it is. You've got, I'm sure Gabor Mate has probably got books. You've got Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. You've got Juliet Cannon, Soul Speak. Debbie Shapiro, I can't remember the name of her book, but she definitely has one. So there's lots of books around the mind-body connection. So when somebody's connecting to the emotion, the best thing I can do is help them release it in that moment. So I will use things like, you know, tapping. I will use EMDR. I will actually sometimes use NLP. And use very kind of somatic techniques to help them release it from the body, because actually once it's released, and they're going to feel much better for that. Okay, so just going back to the language. So I know I shouldn't people please, but I can't stop myself. So I know, but if you like, that might be something, or I believe, but. So there's those kind of two sides. So there's going to be a part for that person that is people pleasing, which they don't know why. Okay, so you would then work with the people pleasing part and find out a lot more about it. You know, but then there's going to be a part of them that perhaps is annoyed that they do that, or frustrated that they do that, or knows that that's not healthy. So again, we can then work with that part, and we can work with other parts, as I say. So it's not just parts in question that we've identified. We would then work with resource parts, as I say, to help the situation to resolve it. So every part of us needs to be heard. Okay, if you take anything away from this video today, I'd love you to take every part of us needs to be heard. Now, this is really important for yourself, in that we do hear ourselves and listen to ourselves. And if you've ever turned around and said to yourself, or said to people, no one listens to me, very often when you're saying that, it's that actually you're not listening to yourself first and foremost. Okay. So every part of us needs to be heard. All right. So that applies to yourself, but it does also apply to other people. So when you are speaking to other people and they're sharing something with you, have that in your mind. Every part of them needs to be heard. So you might not agree with what they're saying. You might be triggered by what they're saying, but it's still worth allowing them to be heard. Okay, because that will help. Because just to give you a for instance, imagine if somebody says, okay, well, tell me about what happened. And you're like, oh my goodness, well, so yeah, this happened, and oh my goodness, and somebody puts their hand up, goes, shh. And I'm like, yes, but shh. Yeah, but I need to shh. Okay, how do you feel? Like, you start to get quite probably angry, or at least annoyed, frustrated. You know, within your body often it's like the energy's stuck because we can't express it, we can't get it out. So that gives you an idea of what it feels like when, you know, we're not allowed to express ourselves. Okay, and it may well be, as a child, it wasn't safe for you to express yourself, so, or you weren't allowed to express yourself. So permission and being allowed is often something that comes up in my work, actually, especially around the toxic relationship side of things. So every part of us needs to be heard. So remember that for yourself, and remember that for other people. So every part of us has needs that need to be met. And first and foremost, it's very much better if we meet those needs ourselves as much as we can. Can't always, but actually it's a bit like going into a relationship and asking someone else to meet your needs. Actually, we need to meet our needs. We need to come to a relationship where, you know, we are meeting our own needs, and we're just, you know, wanting and having that person sharing our life with us, for instance. But obviously there are times when there are certain needs that maybe you can't meet, or you won't be able to, for various different reasons, which, you know, could be unending. So I'm not really going to go into that, but it might be that you need a doctor, or you need a dentist, or you need a surgeon, or whatever it is. So there are going to be certain times when you can't obviously meet those own needs. But as I say, each part carries their own thoughts, their own feelings and emotions, behaviours, strategies, beliefs. Very often we have. So Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, I believe is his book. He shares that, by the age of 7, up to 70% of our beliefs are limiting beliefs, beliefs that hold us back or are disempowering. So it might be things like, I am incapable, I am useless, I am abandoned, I am unacceptable, I am unlovable, and many other things. And that's quite staggering when you think about it. So each of these parts is carrying their own wounds, their own traumas as well, things they've been through, or unpleasant experiences as well. So things they've been through. So if you were bullied as a child, there is the part of you that was bullied that is carrying that stuff. So if you haven't had therapy, if you haven't healed that or worked on that, for instance, then it's going to be carrying that. And often when you've been bullied, one of the beliefs that you carry is, I am powerless. And sometimes along with that, I am trapped or I am helpless. They often follow as well. So you do get parts that are kind of fragmented, if you like. So this is where they have gone through, part of you has gone through an unpleasant experience or a trauma. And the way I describe it is effectively kind of that aspect of you, that part of you has kind of moved, has kind of detached from the body. It is still attached by a cord, okay? But effectively it's a part of your soul, really. It's not even an aspect of your personality, but part of your soul that has kind of fragmented off, okay? And anyone that does healing will most likely already know this or agree with this. And very often, like I had somebody very shamanic who I did a part session with, and she actually said to me, what you're actually doing is soul retrieval. Just you're doing it in a slightly different way to shamanism. So it's effectively retrieving that aspect of your soul that kind of took itself off to keep itself safe. So very often it's to keep you safe, all right? And you're basically working with that part, you're accessing that part, you're connecting to that part, and then you're bringing it back in. And what will happen is most people will then say to me at the end of the session, no matter what we work with, I feel more whole, or I feel more complete. And that's because we have retrieved that aspect of your soul that needed that help. Okay, so we're bringing them back in. So as I've just briefly shared, the intention of most parts is about keeping us safe. So it's either safety or survival or protection, or a bit of a medley of those. So everything we do is to basically be safe. And I actually learned this when I was training in canine flow, and the whole ethos regarding canine flow is everything a dog does is to feel safe. And of course, like I'm sharing with you today to keep in your mind, I've had that in my mind ever since I trained in 2016, I think it was. And what happened at one point was I realized that actually everything we do is to feel safe. So I want to share that with you again as a nugget. Everything we do is to feel safe in some way. And it might be difficult to see that either when you're in it or you are getting that from somebody else, or experiencing it with somebody else. But everything we do is to feel safe or to survive or to protect ourselves. Okay. So I hope all of this is sitting with you in some way, and it might be that you need to listen to this again and again, because there's a lot that I'm going to be sharing this, but as I say, it will then make sense as we move forward. So to go more specifically into the language, okay, we've covered a couple of bits anyway, but so one of the ones people will say is, on one hand, okay, on one hand, I really would, I really do feel like we should go and visit the in-laws at Christmas. But on the other hand, I don't get much time to myself. I really want to have time to myself. I want to do the things that I've not been able to do. I want to catch up on X, Y, Z, whatever that may be. Okay, you've got a parts conflict. There's a part of you that is wanting to go to the in-laws, or feels obliged to, or guilty that you should go to the in-laws. Okay, and then you've got a part of you that really would love to do some stuff for yourself, have quality time, etc. So on one hand, okay, we've already covered part of me this, part of me that. People might say I'm torn, or I feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place. Similar one to on one hand is people might say in one way. So in one way I want to do this, but in another, okay, so it's a similar thing. you might get this feeling of just this like push pull, you know, so a part of you that wants to move forward somehow and a part of you that's kind of pulling you back. So you'll get that. And it's a bit like a tug of war, which we'll go into in a minute. One step forward, two back. So you might even say that phrase. I feel like I'm, you know, one step forwards and then I get to take two back. Self-sabotaging often suggests there's a parts conflict for the very same reason that we've kind of discussed. Okay. So it might be that somebody really wants to eat healthily, but still goes to eat, you know, the bad stuff. Or they know that they need to get that presentation done, but they've suddenly decided that they really love ironing and they want to do the ironing. And, you know, hands up, I've done this. You know, this is why some of these examples I can share are mine. Some of them are not. They're you know, they're from client experiences or things that I already know about. Now, the language can also be very specific with the individual parts. So when I said about the major personality parts driving your life, some of the parts have their own language, and I will go into that with each of those parts just to keep it a bit more succinct. Okay. So parts conflict, that's what we call it if there is parts that are in that push-pull situation. So I shared a minute ago this metaphor of a tug of war. So I want you to just, you know, close your eyes or just imagine that right now, that you've got a part at one end of that rope and a part at the other, and you've got a ribbon in the middle. Now, often with this, with parts, what you will have is you'll either have parts that are quite equal in terms of the energy use in your life, so how much they're used in your life, but sometimes it isn't equal. So sometimes when we're working with parts, what will happen is we'll notice that a part is being very dominant. So it's, you know, that's going to be the part that's winning the tug of war. Or you might have a part that, I suppose the opposite to dominant to me is submissive, but underused. So overused and underused is another good way of putting it. So it might be you have a part that's underused, and it can also be contextual. So people might say to me, you know, I'm not a very confident person. Okay. And then they will share about them, you know, going and speaking on a stage in front of hundreds of people as part of their business or their work. And so there is a part of them that is confident. We just need to use that confidence or that assertiveness or whatever it is, creativity, you know, and change the context and bring it in. So, so parts can be dominant and they can be submissive or overused and underused. And when a part is not being heard, okay, they will often try and become quite dominant when they're not really being heard. So if you remember the phrase we said earlier, every part wants to be heard. And think of the analogy of a child in a supermarket. So you've gone into the supermarket to do your weekly shop, and, you know, either you've witnessed a child or you've got a child, your own child with you. And what happens is, you know, there's a mom or dad, in a minute, you know, because actually you've met somebody who you haven't seen for a while, and just, oh, hello, how are you? And you start talking to them, and this child is tugging at your coat like, mom, dad, or whoever it is, auntie, in a minute, Johnny, in a minute. So this child is like, okay, I'm not being heard, you know, I'm not being listened to. So it might try and jangle the chain on the trolley. Johnny, stop it. Carries on talking to this friend. So this child is like, okay, that didn't work. So the behavior starts to ramp up. So the child might start to wander off and, you know, maybe knock something off a shelf or run their hands down a shelf, making noise. And again, gets shouted at, Johnny, stop it. Goodness sake, come here. Just stand still, you know, or whatever it is. And eventually the behavior will ramp up so much that they may well just literally get on the floor and cry and scream and have a massive tantrum. And that's often, and then of course what happens is they have that, Johnny, for goodness sake, what is it? What is it that you so much want my attention, or whatever you would say? And suddenly they're being heard. And it's the same with parts of us. Okay, when they're not being heard, the behavior will often ramp up. What will happen is something that started out, say, as a very kind of mild emotion, like, say, annoyance, okay, suddenly starts to turn, because then, you know, the part is not being heard. So it turns from annoyance to maybe like really severe frustration to maybe anger, you know, and then it will turn to rage. Okay, so the energy distorts. It will distort and kind of, grow out of proportion the longer somebody is not being heard. Now, that can be to do with ourselves not hearing us or other people, for instance. Okay, so it again, it's worth knowing this, that there's probably been times where you kind of go, I don't know where that came from. Where it's like the straw that broke the camel's back, and you had this massive emotional response, you got triggered, and it could be something as simple as like somebody at work borrowed your pencil and you just went ape, and you were like, where did that come from? Oh my God, and it was like, it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, often that's because something has built up and up and up and up and up of maybe people taking advantage or taking stuff from you or disrespecting you. And suddenly on, maybe a really bad day, they've taken that pencil and that's it, yet again, that part has been triggered. And I think of all these different experiences that we go through as a string of beads. So you've got the first experience, okay, that you go through with, as I say, maybe somebody taking advantage of you. That's it's not that, is it, in that situation? Say being disrespectful, not asking permission or being polite and letting you know they've done it or whatever. Okay, feeble example, I know, borrowing a pencil, but it's the one that came to my mind. So you think of that basically as, excuse me, I needed a drink, as the first bead. And then you have another experience down the line where something has happened and somebody's disrespectful, and it builds on that energy. Like we were saying there, it builds on the emotion and maybe the beliefs that were set up in the first episode of disrespect, and so on. And this string of beads builds and builds and builds until eventually you get the one where, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. And what can happen is we can access, obviously, some of those experiences, and we can start basically knocking those beads out and knocking out that emotional intensity and response. Normally, when you're working, you won't necessarily go straight back to the first episode, as much as I think a lot of us may love to do that. I certainly would love to do that quite often, and just go right back to the first experience and wipe the rest out. But our subconscious is there to protect us. So it will bring up things that we're ready to heal. So when we repress things, it's our subconscious repressing it because it's not safe for us to deal with it, maybe, or we're not ready to deal with it. So we will suppress it. Okay, but when it comes back into our conscious mind, it's because the subconscious or the unconscious is saying to us, you are ready to heal, that you're ready to handle this. Okay, so it won't always be a case of we can go right, well, most of the time we don't go right back to the first experience. You'll maybe go back to the most present experience, and then that will bring up something maybe that's slightly further down that string of beads to be worked with. So there's a lot in here that I didn't intend to tell you in this episode, but it's obviously just coming up, and that's why it needs to be shared. So there are parts that, well, actually, I'm just going to touch back on the rage episode, okay, because this is important, is that very often people are scared if they have rage within them. I've worked with several people who've had that, and this is to the point where this rage, they will, smash their phones. So there's a lot of kind of fight response where they're smashing things, and they're scared. They're scared to address it because they're scared that, for instance, they might even kill someone through this rage. But actually, again, when you hear the part of you that is raging, it doesn't increase, it decreases, because we're listening to it. We're trying to work out what it needs and how we can help it. So it will actually start to bring that rage down to the point that maybe that rage actually isn't rage anymore, and we rename that part from the rage part to the part that's feeling angry, okay, or whatever the emotion is that it's then gone down to. So it's very important to know that if you are suffering, with rage, parts therapy is really good for working with that, because we need to listen to that part of us. Now, in no way am I suggesting that if you are holding on to rage, that you go out and you do something that is unhealthy or harmful to yourself or others at all. I'm talking about we're listening to the part of us that is holding that emotion of rage, that intense amount of emotion, and we're finding it out from it, from within, what it means and how it feels, why it feels that way, and we're working with it to reduce it. That's a very different energy and experience, okay? So just need to make that clear. So we do hide parts of ourselves, okay? And I'm sure many of us will have been through this, that you know, as a child, quite often anger was an emotion that most parents generally would have tried to stop their child from feeling. Okay, don't get angry, no. Not being allowed to fully express it. Okay, but there are other emotions, but anger is quite a common one I've seen, where people have not been allowed to express their anger. So they hide it or they internalize it. Okay, we repress it because we don't know what else to do with it. I remember when I was in a car accident and somebody's gone up the back of my car, and I got out of that car and I was feeling very angry that they'd done that. However, I was already trained in therapies at that point. So I was aware that I was very angry. I was aware that it was not going to be a good idea to share that anger at that moment in time. So I purposefully did actually repress it, but only for that moment in time so that we could rationally deal with the situation, get myself home. Then I tuned in and connected with the anger, and I basically tapped. So I did tapping, which is like acupuncture without needles. I did tapping to release that anger, because I knew that actually when you repress it and kind of internalize it, all that's doing is going to create dis-ease in my body. Okay, so inflammation very often on a metaphysical level can be anger, criticism, resentment. So those kind of really strong, sort of spiky emotions. So I wasn't holding on to that. You know, so I tapped on it to release it. So we do repress and we do hide, and this will often come out when we're working with parts therapy. So parts therapy, I'll explain it now, is a very spatial process where when I work with people, we are moving, well, they are moving around a room. So you have one position like I am here, that's the sum of all of your parts. And then as you're accessing parts, it might be that there's a part that's just over in the corner, for instance, or there's a part that's behind a door, or there's a part that is I've had parts where people have said to me it's out in the car park, and I've said to them, okay, that's fine, just close your eyes and imagine you're out in the car park. So it doesn't even have to be in the same room. Okay, and I don't even have to do this online seeing people. I can do it over the phone as well. Bit harder because I have to know where each part is, because that's important as well. But you'll often see it. So if somebody has a hidden part of them, often where they choose to be in the space will indicate that in some way. So it can get very interesting. It's not just, to me, it's not just a talking therapy and a somatic therapy. It's also a very visual therapy as well. But we also disown parts of ourselves as well and reject parts of ourselves. And again, there's various reasons for this, but it may well be that that was something that wasn't liked in us as a child, for instance. Okay, so we disown that part of us. Or it may be that we've heard society or our parents disliking that in somebody else. So we instantly go, oh, I'm going to disown that part of myself. And a really good way of knowing this is what you dislike in someone else is normally what you dislike in yourself. So if you don't like the neediness in somebody, you don't like the needy part of yourself. If you don't like people that are not taking responsibility for their behavior, for instance, you don't like the part of you that is not taking responsibility. So sometimes this work can be quite sometimes be quite hard, because you're going to have to accept that, if that makes sense. You're going to have, you know, sometimes we go, I'm not needy, or, you know, I take responsibility for my behavior, but there are times when we don't, and we just aren't conscious of it, or we don't recognize that that's what's happening. So, and obviously, as I say, that's just two examples, but always consider like what you dislike in someone else is what you dislike in yourself. Okay. And if you don't like that needy part of you, then it's probably that you've disowned it. So you're not needy because you've disowned that part, because you feel ashamed of that part or whatever it is. So we disown and reject parts of ourselves. And again, this work is all about accepting those parts of us. What good do they have to bring into our life? What's their reason for being? What's their role in our lives? Very often we don't like, for instance, our inner critic, but actually our inner critic, if it is kind of focused in the correct way, is there to help us, is there to, in a sense, like if we have a critic and judgmental part can be very similar. But I'll work with just the example of the sort of the judgment part, because it's a better example in this case. So if we didn't have any judgments, we would just step off the pavement whether there's a lorry coming or not. But because we have like a critiquing part of us, a judging part of us, it recognizes from, education and learning that actually, if I step off in front of that lorry, it's not going to be a good idea. I can't just be fearless and go, I will be fine. So we learn in a positive way, okay, I'm going to just hang back, or I'm going to go to the pedestrian crossing, or I'm going to wait until that lorry has passed and then check the road's clear and then I'll go across. So that part of us has helped us judge what is the right thing to do. Okay, so no part of us, I believe, is all negative. It may have negative connotations in our life, or what it's trying to do for us is having a negative impact. That doesn't mean that's its intention. And you'll find that in some of the parts we go into, because as I say, their intentions are good. Their intentions are to keep us safe, help us survive, protect us, if you recall that we said that. So very often, even if it's having a negative impact in our life, we just, it's about then talking to it and these parts of us understanding that they're having that negative impact. Because very often when I've done this with people, those parts don't realize they're having that impact, that negative impact. And as soon as they become aware of it, things shift. So we don't even necessarily need to release anything, because them just having that awareness has made them realize, oh, okay, we can't keep doing that. So to give you for instance, the loving part of me was so used to loving everybody else's inner child that it had kind of just put mine on the back burner, because it was like the safety aspect was to love other people's inner child. So of course, when my inner child and my loving part kind of connected with each other, my inner child basically told my loving part to something off. It didn't trust it because the loving part hadn't been there for it. It wasn't there for it. And it took a lot of time for the anger in my inner child to really calm down. And also for the loving part to forgive itself for not being there for my inner child. When it actually realized the impact it had and how that inner child was now experiencing it, that it didn't trust it and it was angry with it. So this is the thing, just those parts all working together can create a lot of healing and a lot of shifts. Because if you think that inner child of mine was really angry, that anger isn't there just for that moment. That anger has been carried with me all the time at my loving part, probably every time it goes to help somebody else's inner child. So the thing is by those parts working and starting to release those emotions, because they're being heard and they're being listened to and the relationship's being built again, you do start to feel lighter. You start to let go of those emotions. Okay, so I hope all of this, as I say, is making sense. We've kind of covered the under and overused, so I won't go into that very much. Each of the hidden repressed parts of us do have, again, their own emotions and their beliefs. So very often they might have they may have limiting beliefs like I'm unlovable, I'm unacceptable, I'm nothing, I'm not important, I'm not significant, I'm not worthy of my own love. And if any of these in itself are resonating and light bulbs are lighting up, then write it down. Okay, write it down for yourself. So as I say, just remember, everything we do is to feel safe, the safety aspect of this. So in this process, as I say, where we're going into spaces, we're accessing parts of ourselves, and we're finding out what their thoughts are, what their emotions are, what do they need, and then we're basically bringing out resource parts of you that can help with this situation, that can back up and support the part that had or has an issue. What we will find is very often we will go from, as I say, the part that feels angry to, by the end of the session, okay, so the part that felt angry. So you can see how I will also change my language when I'm working because of the changes that have been made. Now, when we've got all of these parts outside of us, okay, obviously at the end of the session, I get people to bring those parts back into themselves. Okay, so I allow them to, bring them in whatever way they want. Okay, so they can breathe them back in, they can get them to float back in. We bring them back in an order that is suitable for my client. So they choose which ones or one they bring in first and last. And obviously we're bringing back in the parts with all of the changes that have been made, all the shifts in their energy. And everything is energy. Thoughts are energy, beliefs are energy, emotions are energy, behaviors are energy. Everything is energy. Emotion is energy in motion, for instance. So we're bringing them back in with all of the changes that they've had. So like we said at the beginning, very often when I say to people, how are you feeling? They will normally say they feel more whole and they feel lighter. Sometimes you can feel tired. Now, the reason I want to share this, because actually when you may have experienced this doing other work that was either somatic work or healing, is because when you have, for instance, when you have somebody that, as a metaphor, imagine somebody, who's trying to attack you, and for 50 years you've been holding your arm out and you've been stopping them from getting to you. Okay. Now, as you can imagine, you do that for so long, that takes a lot of your energy. And this is the thing that we need to understand, is when we are keeping parts of us repressed or down, or we're getting triggered all the time, but we know we can't say anything, so we repress that emotion that's come up again. That takes a lot of energy. It can make us very, very tired. Okay, and as I say, it's like that metaphor of trying to keep somebody from attacking you. Okay, and that could be that as to how you speak to yourself or how you're speaking to other people. Now, obviously, when you suddenly step out of the way and let that attacker fall off a cliff, okay, your arm is not going to suddenly feel light and fluffy and airy straight away. Okay, you're going to suddenly go flipping heck. I've had to use my arm, my strength, and all my energy to keep that at bay for 50 years of my life. My arm is feeling really heavy and really tired. So sometimes when somebody has worked on something that's very intense, very emotionally draining, often they will feel tired to start with at the end of the session, but actually that will gradually release, that will gradually go as the arm, as a metaphor, returns to normal. Okay, the same as if you were holding onto a heavy anchor for 50 years of your life, or 30, or whatever it would be, and you suddenly let it go. Again, a similar thing. Your arm is not going to suddenly feel light and happy and fluffy. Suddenly you're going to realize just how much your muscles hurt, and it's been in that position, so your whole arm aches and you can hardly move it, and it's going to take time for that to return to homeostasis, to balance. Okay, so people can feel tired, but actually, when we're shifting, remember, everything is energy. We're mainly made up of water. So the best thing to do when you've actually experienced a session like that, where you've let go of a lot, is to actually ground yourself, is to actually go and get a drink of water and actually, ground yourself in that way, replenish the water. Okay. So just looking at obviously what else. So yeah, we release energy somatically, as I say, in these sessions. Past lives, yes, just wanted to touch on that as well. So past lives can come into this. Now I'm trained in past life regression. I'm also, as a little bit of a nugget for you right now, I'm also hoping to use that with pets. I have done a past life regression with one pet, with animal communication. Well, in fact, two actually. and it worked exceedingly well. But I've also learned another way where actually you can regress owners of pets, so pet owners, to work on their pets' issues, and that's definitely something I'm going to be exploring in this year. Okay, but past life can also come into this. So I find with past lives, when somebody is, so I get people to describe the energy. So say they've got a belief of I'm abandoned, I'll get them to just to feel into where that is into the body and describe it to me. And very often the way somebody describes the energy of that belief or whatever it is that I've got them to connect to will give me an idea of whether it's past life energy or not. Mainly the question I would ask is, does that energy feel like it's been there for a long time? And if they say yes, I already normally know by that point. But if I'm not sure, and I just want a bit of confirmation, I'll ask them. And I'll always say to people, if it doesn't, please say no. Because I'm never one to, to want to force that on somebody. It has to be right for them. Okay, with what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. But if they say yes, okay, then we will work with that. So just to give you, for instance, I had a lovely lady come to see me, and she said, I've been seeing her for a while, and she just talked to me and said, it was really odd. There was an article on the news recently where, and some of you might remember this, where the children were trapped in a cave and they were starving basically because obviously they had no access to food. And she said, I got really triggered by this. And she said, I was sobbing and I have just been so obsessive about watching the news on it. I needed to know they were okay. She said, this is just really odd. Like, this is not like me. I normally might be concerned and have a lot of empathy and sympathy for them and, shed a tear. But to this degree, this isn't normal for me. So I said, well, would you like us to work on it? Let's just see what comes up. Because to me, everything is information. There's a reason why that's coming up for that person. And so she said yes. And actually, by working with parts therapy, what it turned out was in a past life, she had been starved. She'd basically been put in a pit and starved to death. So effectively, I'm getting loads of goosebumps. I don't know whether you are, but I'm getting goosebumps right now. And goosebumps normally means we are sharing truth. I haven't had goosebumps at all right throughout the video. There's no drafts. I know that goosebumps in this particular situation means that it's, we're sharing truth. And it's not the first time I've had it. And so, yeah, we worked with that energy and we released that energy and she felt a lot better. And it then changed the way she dealt with that, what was going on in the world with that particular news article and that situation. So it didn't mean that she didn't have any empathy or sympathy at all. It just meant that she didn't have that, I suppose, intense emotional experience, because for her, it was a trigger. It had happened to her before. And very often when it's happened to us before, we will feel it very, very deeply. You will know that if you've been through something and then someone else has shared an experience where they've had something very similar happen to them, and they're telling you without even knowing your history, and you can resonate with them to a certain degree. So past lives, can come into it very much so. I've had plenty of past lives. I've had 2 where I've been beheaded. I've had ones where I was a witch, and with the witch one, that was really interesting. Let me just share that. With the witch one, basically, this was one I did with my tutor actually, and what happened was I accessed that part of me that was a witch in a past life, and I was actually being burnt at the stake. And it was in the days, obviously, where witches were seen as bad people, and everybody thought I was bad. And in that particular situation, I was like, really, you think I was bad? And I saw myself turning people in the, congregation. Why am I saying that? They were there to watch me being burnt at the stake, and I started turning people into like fish and frogs. I was like, you want me to be bad, I'll be bad. It was that kind of thing. And I sort of thought, I'm quite feisty like that in this life. Obviously, don't turn people into fishes and frogs, but I definitely have that kind of feisty energy to me. And um Effectively then what happened, obviously I still got burnt at the stake, and I actually could feel the flames coming up my arms, but I also then felt my soul drop out of that body, which I'm very pleased about. I didn't particularly want to feel being burnt at the stake fully, thanks very much. But it was a really interesting experience, both to feel that being on the stake, being burnt, but actually then feeling my soul drop out. You know, it was an incredible experience, and there was a lot of information, actually very sort of spiritual, philosophical information that also got shared in that session. And sadly, neither myself or my tutor recorded it, because afterwards I was like, that was so good, and I can't remember what I said. Because when you're in the part, you're saying things, you don't always remember what you've said when you're, you know, when you're fully in it. So that was one of my past lives, but I've had other ones where I've been killed for speaking out. I've been killed for being a healer, a medium, so a psychic. You know, there's been lots of things. And very often, if you've had a lot of past lives where you've been killed for being you bring in kind of a belief of it's not safe to be me. Okay, I'm not allowed to be me. So if in any way that resonates with you, you may well have had a past life or lives where you've not been allowed to be you. It's not been safe because you've been killed. So what, you know, what we're then learning is, okay, I can't do that in this life because I'm going to get killed, because that part of you doesn't realize that, you know, times have changed and that's not necessarily going to happen. Okay, so yeah, and there's loads more I can share with you, but I don't want to make the video too long. So with each of the parts, as I say, there's a lot of mediation going on. It's a lot about meeting needs. That's quite an important thing. And about parts being heard. I mean, being able to share very vulnerably, really, but in a way that they're not being judged or criticized or ridiculed or anything else. They're actually just allowed to share how they feel, what they think, why they feel the way they do, you know, because that's their experience. We don't want to dismiss parts of ourselves. We don't want to just go, oh, no, you don't feel like that. I mean, how many of you have had that where somebody goes, that's not true, you don't feel like that. You know, and they dismiss how you feel. Okay. So yes, there's a lot of kind of awareness of parts. You know, they become aware of each other. They're becoming aware of their actions toward each other or non-actions. They become aware of their thinking, of the feeling, of the emotions. So there's a lot that goes on in parts. But as I say, I'm hoping this will allow you to understand the other videos a lot better. So we're nearly at the end. So just going to get you to meet the parts briefly that we're going to be talking about. So the major parts that we're going to be looking at are the protector part. So the protective part of you, the loving part of you. Now the loving part actually has two sides, which we'll go into. And there's also the pusher part of you. So we then have the perfectionist, the inner critic, the pleaser, i.e. the people-pleasing part, and the inner child. And each of these is going to have their own episode, and I will share with you as much as I can during those episodes, though ironically they're probably going to be slightly shorter than this overview itself, because we're covering a lot today that relates generally to parts. So before we end this video, I'm going to leave you with some tips from what we've shared today. So firstly, every part of us, including from other people, wants to be heard. Every part of us wants to be heard. Something that you dislike in others is generally something that you dislike in yourself, a part that you dislike in yourself. The example we used in this case was needy, but it could be any part. The other thing I have noticed is I want you to think about times when you've been around somebody who is, for whatever reason, angry or angry with you. Very often when you are around somebody like that, if you're very sensitive to people's emotions and to the environment, you're very tuned to your environment, you will often feel their anger, and you will respond very often by feeling anxious, by feeling unnerved or nervous. And this doesn't just happen externally, it can also happen internally when there is parts of you that are also having that situation where one part is angry at another part. And so the part that is feeling the anger from the other part will actually feel anxious, nervous, unnerved, all of those kind of things. So they do respond to each other's emotions. So I just wanted to bring that in. Also, what you disown, so what you dislike, the universe will very often bring you, and it does make me smile, but it happens very often. A really good example that I've seen come up so many times is this kind of opposites attract energy of the sloth, or somebody that's a little bit more chilled, and somebody that's very much more the busy bee, the doer. So you've got somebody that perhaps is very busy, they're constantly on the go, they will, they're just not making time to be, basically. They, it's like they'll have tea, it's like tables, the plates get whipped off the table, we've got to do this now. And whereas the other energy, the kind of the sloth, or the being energy, some people would call it lazy, but I don't necessarily see that, although obviously that lazy part could exist in a session. But very often you get kind of that the more sloth, the more chilled energy. And of course, then that might be very irritating for the person that's the doer. But actually, what it's showing is that we often need balance. We are human beings, we are not human doings. So we do need time to be, and we do need time to do. There are times when it's appropriate for us to actually sit back and chill out and actually take time for ourselves. This could be self-care, it could be because you're ill, or you're incapacitated, or whatever it might be. You might just need that time out on a mental level, that I just need to be on my own and recharge and read a book and not do anything else. So it can be about balance. But as you see a lot in relationships, where you'll get this opposite energy, and often it's kind of that sort of that grinding sort of feeling that is quite irritating to the other person, on both sides, when they're actually experiencing that opposite energy. But it's all about us seeing that it's about teaching us balance. It's reflecting back to us a part that maybe we have disowned in ourselves, that perhaps we saw modeled from our parents, that you do, you get stuff done and you keep doing it, and then you go to bed, and then you get up again and you go to work, or whatever it is. Or it may just be that they do that because it's a nervous thing to do. So there's different reasons it comes up, but it's worth, if you have that kind of opposites attract, have you disowned that part? Have you rejected that part of you? Is it trying to show you where balance is needed in your life, where actually sometimes we do just need to down tools, stop what we're doing and go for a walk, and actually we'll be more productive when we come back? Or we do just need to rest because our body is telling us and we're not listening to it. So that comes up quite a lot. Another thing that I want you to take away from this is, with parts, for instance, that we may not like, it's not always, a lot of people will say, oh, I don't have that part in me. Now, very often we do have that aspect within us. It's just that we don't use it, or we've hidden it, or we've repressed it because perhaps we were shamed for having it, or we don't like it, so we've hidden it. So again, sometimes it's acceptance that there is a part of us within us, even if we don't use it, that we have the ability. The one that's coming to mind is hate and love. We have the ability to hate, but it doesn't mean that we do that. And again, it's about acceptance. If we I suppose, if there is a part of us that has hated someone or something, it's about us looking at that part, looking at how it thinks, how it feels, what does it need. Very often, what's coming to me right now is, very often those parts that we would see as bad or negative like that actually generally need love more than anything else. Okay. Remember what we don't let go of, as I say, when we're keeping hold of that. And I appreciate there are reasons why we do that. All right. What we don't let go of often can make us feel very tired. It's very draining to having to keep energy down. It's like trying to constantly keep the jack in the box, if that makes sense. So it's always worth remembering that as well. And very much all of this is contextual. As I said to you, I've already mentioned relationships, but also it could be different areas of your life. So we've already shared about, it might be that somebody is really good at managing in their business or their workplace because they've got that title, they've been given that authority, yet they're not managing their own life. They're not dealing with their own life. And so again, we can bring out aspects that person needs. So say somebody is really disorganized at home, if they are organised elsewhere, for instance, we can bring out that part and work with that part to help them deal with their home. Okay, even in that session, we can come up with tasks and activities and things like that, that it will be, you know, it's got the skills to do that. So we're accessing that resource within that person. Okay, now one example I want to share with you, just I know I've given a couple already, but I want to share one that I did. Now this was within probably about 2014, 2015, I expect the latter year there. And it was when I had gone to my tutor to actually have a part session. And we'd got 5 parts on the go. Now that's quite normal for me. I tend to have like at least 3, 4, 5 parts. That's normally the maximum is the 5. We had 5 parts out, and it was very clear from all of the different parts that we'd accessed that they needed my spiritual part of me, which was a part that, although I had not been used at all. I was not into spirituality at that point, didn't know I was spiritual, didn't realize that actually that's kind of our birthright, if you like. We're all spiritual. And so when we stood in that part of us, or I stood in that part of me, what actually happened was I said, actually, this part is not down here where I'm standing. This part is up in the ethers, and it needs to come down. And I remember my tutor saying, okay, you sure you want to do that? You know, that's quite a lot to do. And I said, no, it needs to get down here. I didn't use those exact words, but I'm sure you can paraphrase. But basically I said, we need that part down here. All of the parts need her. So it has to come down today. And effectively, I imagined a chord between me standing there in that part and the spiritual part that was up in the ethers. And I just basically pulled, like you would a balloon, really. I pulled that part down and brought it back within me. So again, we're going back to I'm retrieving that, you know, soul retrieval. I'm retrieving that part of me and bringing it back. And then after that, we brought back all of the parts within me. So I was now a full sum of my parts with all of the changes, all of the shifts that occurred. Okay. And just whilst I remember on that, even though we're not doing parts therapy on this session, by you even recognizing that you have parts conflicts, or that you are using language, that there are certain parts of you that are opposing each other or conflicting each other, that will create a small shift, could even create a big shift. So sometimes the awareness itself will create a shift in your energy. It happens quite a bit, right? It may not be fully, because we're not working somatically, we're not getting energy out of the body that is stuck in the cells of the body and so on, but you will find that there is often a shift of some description because you are now suddenly aware of something that you weren't before. So I did just want to share that. So once we brought the parts back in, I remember my tutor saying to me, okay, just be a little bit gentle and kind with yourself over the coming days. And I was like, okay, sure. And she said, I don't think you realise the impact of what you've just done. And I said, okay. And she said, you know, the session you've had today, what you've done is a little bit like Thor slamming his hammer on the ground and the vibrational effects of that. And I still didn't really get it. I took it on board and said, okay, I'll be very kind and gentle to myself. The next day, however, I was sobbing, I had tears, near enough, I suppose, like a little mini breakdown. And then suddenly I did get it. I really got how powerful and impactful this can be on our psyche. And it's been a great learning lesson, not just for me, but also when working with clients, or what, you know, when we're working, just to make sure I'm keeping, you know, well, I always keep people safe, but just making sure that we don't go too far, if you like. And you know, it's very client-led, so I will never say to somebody we're not going to do that, but definitely I would be doing what my tutor said, and just be a little bit gentle and kind to yourself over the coming days, not making any really massive big decisions. Just let what you've done today integrate and process, because it does take about 24, 48 hours for kind of these changes to really settle back in. And very often after a session, people might feel just a little bit tired. And they, normally I say to people, because we've shifted energy and because we're mainly made of water, best thing you can do is reground yourself. So drink more water, go out if you can, bare feet on the ground, or just connecting to nature, hands on a tree, holding the leaves that are connected to the earth, just grounding in some way. And if you can't do that, just imagine roots coming out from the soles of your feet and a cord coming from the bottom of your spine and going into the earth, and the same from the soles of your feet, cords going into the earth, grounding you and stabilizing you. Okay, so that can happen, but very often if somebody's feeling really, really like super tired, it's very often because of the analogies that we shared earlier about that heavy anchor. Once we let it go, arms going to feel really heavy and tired, and then it's going to start to kind of move back towards a better state of being. And the same as I say, if we're fending off that attacker, that we've been trying to do for 50 years, as soon as we step out of the way and let them go, we're not going to necessarily feel great straight away, because we've been using all our energy to keep them at bay. So sometimes people can feel more tired, but definitely most people will say to me, I feel more whole, because effectively we've done that soul retrieval. We've brought in that fragmented part of them and accepted it into the whole. And we've also created changes within that aspect of them, that part of them, by releasing, disempowering beliefs, emotions that were associated with those beliefs as well. We may have changed coping behaviours and strategies they've taken on board, or patterns of behaviour. So there's a lot that can change within a session. So what else? So the last thing I want to share with you is just a reminder, really, to listen to your language, become aware. If you need to, like, re-listen to the beginning of this, where I said about obviously the language that suggests there are parts conflicts, or that there are parts playing out. So part of me this, part of me that, yes, but, and what was it, on one hand, rock in a hard place, I'm torn, all of those kind of things. Listen to your language, start to become aware of whether there are parts conflicts playing out, because as I said, awareness will sometimes create a small shift within you with that. And because when you're more aware, I say this all the time, awareness is empowerment, because if I'm not aware of something, then how can I change something I don't know I need to change? But actually, if I'm aware of something, I've become aware of something, then I have the ability, then I'm empowered to actually think, feel, and act differently. So after listening to today's video, if you want to follow me online, then just go back to the episode description and you'll see all of my social media links there where you can connect with me. There'll be, posts where you can ask me questions and comments. What were your takeaways from today's video? I know it's been a long one, longer than actually I expected or anticipated, but I very much go with the flow. I've got my notes, I know what things I want to say, but I also know very much that, spirit is here, spirit will be guiding me. There'll be certain examples, they pop into my head because that needs to be shared. So yeah, share with me your takeaways, your questions, your comments. What did you resonate with? What one thing that I said just like really popped out to you, because again, that is giving you an awareness. There's information in that kind of light bulb moment. So I really look forward to hearing from you. Our next episode is going to be all about the protective part, so it's going to be very specific. So until then, please do take care, and I will speak to you all very soon.